everybody, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you my mid-month update on my One Book July or my One Project July 2022. This is where I transcribe a book called The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie using my fountain pens and my fountain pen ink samples. Now, I have done a introductory video in the previous video I posted up, and you can watch that if you want. But I have done a spread in my collections bullet journal just outlining everything I said in that previous video. And once again, I'm going to transcribe a book. I did change my mind a little bit from the first video. I'm only going to be using fountain pens that have a medium, nib, or higher. That's medium, broad, or stub, and that's the ones I have. I just wanted to see how they look in the notebook, especially since I'm only using ink samples as well, and I think that using the fatter nibs show off the ink properties more than, let's say, a fine nib. So I decided to limit all the fountain pens I use to medium nibs or higher. Now, the notebook that I used is from Taroko Design, and it's this notebook here. It's their Odyssey notebook. It uses the Cosmo Airlight paper, and this is the first time that I've been using this paper. This book is also something that I've been using new for this year, since January, and this is from Kokuyo, and it is their Sara notebook. It uses a 4mm square grid, and I mentioned that because when I was writing this spread, I used my fountain pen. It is this very nice Lamy Studio, and it uses platinum carbon ink. I didn't realize until I was writing with this pen that it feathers in this book. The ink feathers in this book. So just a warning, if you try to use this ink in this notebook, there might be feathering. It's not only in this part of the notebook that I noticed feathering. It's in the rest of the spread here. That was enough for me to stop using this pen in this notebook. I ended up switching to a gel pen because I didn't have any other black fountain pen inked up at the moment. Now, moving on to this spread here, I wrote down the details of the book, which is The Murder at the Vicarage by Agatha Christie, and I did borrow it from the library. This book was formatted for ESL readers, and that means when I flipped over to the book, I could see how many words there are. And I don't think most books have this, but there are 24,358 words in this book. Now, as for head words, I don't understand what it means, and I tried Googling that, but I couldn't find a clear answer, and there are about 2,200 of these head words. And then I just wrote down the 32 chapters and 106 pages. Now, for progress, I wrote down, or I'm hoping to write down when I finish, how many actual pages that I used in this notebook, and of that number of pages, how many did I use for writing, for diagrams, and for the ink swatches. So I'll fill that in when I'm finished. Now let's move on to the next page. I decided to just, every time I switch to a new ink, I would color in the type or the color of ink in this section. So right now I have written 20 chapters, and that is 2 chapters I use the same ink, and that means there are 10 inks in total right now. Now here, I categorize the inks by their quality. So some will have sheening, some will have shimmering, and some will have shading. Some inks which have more than one of these, so it looks like there's a lot more inks than these 10 right here. I don't really like how this turned out though, because all the blocks are too close together and kind of all the colors blur together. But at least visually it gives me a little bit of an idea of the properties of those inks. And then of course the details of all of those inks will be in the book itself. Next, I have ink rankings. Because I'm only using ink samples, I decided to rank them on whether or not I would buy the full ink bottle based on what I've been using with the ink sample. The first ink ranking would be, I would purchase a full bottle of it based on the sample. The second ink ranking is, I would purchase a full bottle of that ink, but I already have something similar, so I don't see the need to buy this bottle. The third ink ranking is, I like the ink, but I don't think I would purchase the full bottle, and I would probably give the reason why. Then for the fourth ranking is I don't like the ink and I wouldn't purchase a full bottle. So here I have written down all 4 rankings, and then I'm just going to write the name of the ink as I go through the notebook. Now this sticky note is sort of an experiment. I was trying to figure out if I could complete the entire book here in this notebook. So what I did was, for the first chapter, I counted the number of pages that the first chapter had in the book itself. So there were 2.5 pages for chapter 1. And then for my writing, it took me 3.5 pages of writing to complete that chapter. However, I don't think this is going to work for my purposes, so I kind of stopped doing that. In my next spread, I haven't actually done anything. It's totally blank. But what I want to do is I'm going to write down my notes on each ink, which I will go through verbally on this video. Then afterwards, I'm going to have to come in here and write down everything I said. Before I get to the flip through, I need to show you my setup, just because it's fun. I do have here a little pouch, and it is an Agatha Christie pouch. And this is, the design is for one of her books, which is Murder on the Orient Express. And then this pouch was made by Out of Print. Now this has inside the stencil that I use. I should have 2 stencils, but I don't know where I put the other one. Okay, you can look here. It has the stencils, it has the stamps that I've been using, and I showed in the previous video about what they are. And then all of the inks, all of the fountain pens that I've used to write so far. So I'm going to take out all of the pens because I'm going to show you the pen as I go through each chapter. I'm not going to do a full review on anything. I'm just going to go as briefly as I can. But I thought it's appropriate to use this pouch with this project. Then here I have all my samples. So I made this little container. If you know what these are MAC lipstick tubes or boxes. And I just cut them in half and stuck them together. They work pretty well for the bigger ink sample bottles. And then also with the smaller ones. And I can see most of those samples I use are the big ones. I think I did that on purpose. I did that on purpose because it is much easier to fill a pen with the bigger ones than this tiny one. I end up using a syringe to fill the pen on this tiny one. So here should be all my 10 pens. They're not in order. I don't know how people do, those projects like 30 inks, 30 days, because I haven't washed any of this and I'm kind of dreading washing all of them. And this doesn't even include my other pens, which are currently ink that I'm using elsewhere. I can't use them in this book because they are from my actual ink bottle collection. So let's flip through. You can have another preview of the inks that I use in here, where I write down every single chapter, and I use the same ink that I used to write the chapter in here. This is the cover page for chapters 1 to 4, and you've already seen me do this. So I will probably skip through that. But I'll get to chapter 3. Now this is using the Colorverse Brain ink. I will pull it out here. And then the pen that I used was this one. So it's the Nemosine Fission, and it's got a medium nib. Just like that. I think the company that makes this has been shut down, so I can't really get it. This is a slightly heavier pen, but it still writes very nicely. And then this ink also writes very nicely. And by the way, I'm going to try and do a little bit of a quick ink review for each of these, but I'm not very good at it. As long as it writes properly, it flows properly, then I will say the ink is nice. If it doesn't do that, if it's clogs or something, then I will say, okay, this is what I didn't like about the ink. But I have for most of the inks, I don't have any comment on wetness or dryness or dry time, as long as it's not extreme. And hopefully that makes sense. So this ink is from Colorverse. It is the number 26 Brain. And I looked it up because this came from a random sample. It does have shimmer in it. You can see a slight golden shimmer. It's not that obvious when you're looking at the page, and it's, you know, it's not even that bright. And I don't know if it's because of the sample or that's just the way it is. But when you buy this ink, you have to buy in a set of two. There's a bigger ink in a different color, and then a smaller ink, which is this bottle. It's a nice olive green. There's some shading. Now here we get to a diagram page, and that's because the book has diagrams. I just photocopied it from the book and stuck them in here. Hopefully that's allowed. And so I just left a space here for that. But the chapter continues. Now you can see how many pages I used by flipping through. But once I got to this page, and I've circled it in pencil, this is when I ran out of ink. So the very last paragraph here, and it's not very many sentences, I just dipped the pen into the ink sample bottle, and then I just continue writing. Here's my thoughts on the ink. I like the ink, but you can't really see the shimmer that well. And you have to buy it with another ink, which doesn't intrigue me in any way. And also, I have an olive green ink already. Now, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar enough in my eyes that I don't need two of them. So I would give this ranking maybe a 3. Just, I like the ink, but I wouldn't buy it. Here we have the cover page, and I decided to put them all together for at least these chapters. This VersaFine ink that I use, it does smudge. You can see it. On this page here, I had to cover up some of the Cosmo Airlight paper with a similar piece of paper because it was just too smudgy. Here, even here, you can see the smudginess from this side of the page. So here's chapter 5, and the ink here is by Krishna, and it's the, I didn't look up how to spell it, I'm sorry, Naval. This is a very nice kind of reddish pinkish ink, and I used this fountain pen. So this is my Platinum 3776, and it's got a broad nib. There we are. I like this nib, very nice. And I also like this ink a lot, and I think mostly it's because I don't have an ink in my collection that's this type of shade, and I don't have that many inks in my collection with this type of shade. That's why I like it so much. It's got some subtle shading to it, and I really like the look of this, just flipping through it. Oh, I should mention now, the reason why I can't really estimate how many pages that I'm going to take for each chapter based on my previous writing is what I do is for every new paragraph, I skip a line. And if you look in this book here, they don't do that. So if there's a new paragraph, there's no extra line. And it won't really match with here, because if you have a chapter where there's a lot of dialogue and there's a new paragraph for each person speaking, then it will just never match up. Here, there's another pencil. It's where I ran out of ink, and you can see the ink lightens a little bit by the time I run out of ink. So I refilled it. Or no, I think I re-dipped it at this point. And so I re-dipped it, and you can see the ink immediately gets darker because the feed on the fountain pen gets more saturated. So I wrote and wrote and wrote until I got to this point where it ran out of ink again. Would I buy this ink? Yes, I like the color. I don't have anything like it, like I said. Although I have tried to look for it and it's been discontinued. So at least now I know I like this color or the shade of ink. Here we have chapter 7. This is a sort of like teal, or more of a blue leaning teal ink. and it is by Ancient Charm, and it's the color October. I've looked it up, and sometimes it's called Winter October or just October. Now the pen that I use for this is the Twisby Swipe, and this Twisby Swipe has a medium nib. I used the converter in here, and there's still quite a lot of ink left. Oops, I opened it the wrong way. But yeah, you can see the ink here. Now this has a very heavy gold shimmer. Where is it? Which one is it? Okay, so it has a very heavy gold shimmer. You can see at the bottom of this sample vial. When I first inked this pen up, I forgot about the shimmer, because since the shimmer is at the bottom, I need to shake it before I ink it up. So I forgot about it until maybe about this point, right? That I decided to try and re-ink it up from the converter. And then I did that, and suddenly the shimmer showed up. Actually, I may be able to figure out exactly at which point I had to re-ink it. Can you see the shimmer here? It's just a lot of it. Very nice. Even on this page. Okay, I think it's the word thank you, around the word thank you. And yeah, after that, there's a ton of shimmer. Very nice. And this ink blob here is, I'm not sure why, but the ink did blob out onto the page, and I had to blot it. This page, you see, has a lot of dialogue, so there's a lot of empty space. Here I've circled it, so yes. Slow issues. That means the pen started to clogging at this point. And I can kind of see why, because there's a lot of shimmer in this ink. But it lasted for quite a while without clogging. And then normally what I do if the pen clogs with something, then I will try to push the converter or switch the converter out so that I could force the ink to start flowing again. But because this is a kind of push converter, I couldn't do that. If I pushed it down, then I would just shoot out ink everywhere. So I was kind of stuck at this point. I think what I did was I ended up just dipping the nib onto the ink sample again, so that I could at least get it to write. And then it will write fine at that point until I got to here where it clogged again. And then I got to here and it clogged again. So a lot of clogging, and I just had to dip the nib into the ink to get it to flow some more. If I had a different type of converter in here, I would have just, twisted it down, but I couldn't do that. So as for the ink itself, other than the clog issues, I really like this ink. I would either give this a rating of 2 or 3. And as for the brand itself, Ancient Charm, I have another ink from them, like a full bottle of ink I got from them, and it's in a different shade. I like that a lot, and it also has a ton of shimmer just like this ink, and it hasn't clogged on the other pen that I used. Now I have only used one pen with that ink, so I can't really say, but maybe the clogging depends on the pen. And so maybe the Twisby Swipe cannot handle the clogging issues with this shimmer. I don't know. So then maybe I have to do more testing. Now this next ink is KWC Honey. And I used, what did I use? I used this Kaweco fountain pen. It's the Kaweco AL Sport fountain pen in the black stonewashed aluminum or something like that. And I picked this pen at this point because, let's go back. I had to use this little bulldog stamp with the Kaweco pen. And this is my only Kaweco, so I decided to do that. I should have used this with a lighter ink so that you can see the pen, like the detail of the pen, but it doesn't really matter. Now this pen is a kind of golden yellow color, but for me it just turns out a little bit of a brownish color with, it almost looks a little bit green as well. and I didn't like this ink. Not only was it kind of hard to write with it, like I felt like because maybe it was too light, I had to press down on the page a lot harder to get the ink to where I wanted it to be. Although the ink is light, so I can't really get it as dark. And also, just the shade itself. I guess I'm not a fan of this type of shade. I definitely am more of a blue ink fan. But it was interesting to try it out. There's another diagram here. And that's the end. So for this ink, I would give it a 4 because I didn't really like the ink and I wouldn't buy a full bottle of it. For chapter 11, this ink is the Graphon Faber-Castell Moss Green. And I put it into my Lamy Studio pen. This is in the aquamarine color and has a medium nib. So as you can see here, it's like a dark foresty green color. It's lots of shading. This ink I felt was really nice and wet and it flowed really nicely. And I could feel that difference there when I was writing with this. However, it might be a little bit, takes a little bit too long to dry. And I'm trying to figure out where that happened because I think it's smudged somewhere. Yeah, here. So it's smudged here. And that, I think that was the first time I had something smudge on this paper so far. Here I ran out of ink, so I had to re-dip the pen into the ink sample. Here's the ink bottle if you wanted to see it inside. And it's hard to read what it says, but it's definitely moss green. I had to re-dip here, I had to re-dip here, then here, and then here. Then we got to the end of the chapter, and then I was done. I would give it a 2 because if I didn't have a similar ink, I would probably buy this based on this, even though it does take a little bit longer to dry than normal, I guess. I do have Diamine Sherwood Green. That's the ink that I have is similar to that. Again, not the same exactly, but similar enough. I don't need 2 bottles of these inks. Here we are onto the last 4 pens and the last 4 inks. I did take a big break in between the filming of the last part. That's okay, let's continue. We'll start off with these 2 chapters. First of all, I stenciled in the wrong chapters. It's supposed to start at chapter 13, but I put 14. So once I realized that error, I just stenciled it on the top here. And then when I was actually writing the chapters, I ended up writing chapter 13, skipping chapter 14, and then writing chapter 15 with that ink. The solution to that was to write chapter 14 in the new ink and then tip in chapter 14 with some pieces of paper so that the chapters would flow correctly. So it looks a little bit weird, and I'll show you that later. I like that I color in the chapter number after I finish writing the chapter. So it's not like I ended up coloring this with the ink here, and then that would be a mistake and I'd have to cover it up or something like that. First ink here is Diamine Marigold. Here's the sample bottle. It comes off as a bit of a reddish orange on this tube, but when you write, it's a very nice bright orange with a nice shading as well. The pen that I picked up to use this is from Schaefer, and it's their Yoda pen. I think the model name is the Schaefer Pop because it does look like the Schaefer Pops in the regular colors, but as you can tell, this is the Star Wars related pen. It's got a medium nib. So with this pen, I wrote all of this ink. I did not like how it looked. It is just too light for me. It's same with the honey ink. Even though it writes just fine, I didn't have any issues writing with it. It's not readable in my eyes. I think in some cases it might be, but not when I'm doing this kind of transcription project. And this is chapter 13 still, and we end up this last half page with the end of chapter 13. This is where I've tipped in my first piece of paper, and I want to show the difference between what I wrote on this new paper, this being the Rhodia dot pad paper, which I just tore out of that terrible notepad, and the difference between this Rhodia paper and this Cosmo Airlight paper. I may have to just take a photo of both and just cut them together and put them on the screen. But when I use the Rhodia paper, it feels different. I know that the Rhodia paper is slightly coated, or maybe it just is coated, and the pen glides across the paper more smoothly, but it makes a difference in the amount of ink that it put down, and even the feeling of it on the Cosmo Airlight paper versus the Rhodia paper was quite different. I like the look of the Cosmo Airlight paper better than the Rhodia paper. When you compare the two, I seem to write smaller on the Rhodia paper. Like if you look at the very first line, it says, "And you left immediately? How long did it take?" When you look at it with the Cosmo Airlight paper, which I wrote down first, the sentence ends at the end of the page, it ends at the word did instead of take. I would give this ink a rating of 3. I like the ink in that the way it performs is just fine. I just don't like the color of the ink. Now on to chapter 14, and here I continued with this Rhodia paper. I used the ink Diamine Shimmering Seas, and here's the ink sample. It is a dark blue color with a gold shimmer. Now, maybe because of the sample, but the shimmer is not consistent. We'll start off, when I start writing with the ink, then you can see the shimmer. Or maybe not, but there is definitely a gold shimmer. Once that initial sentences show up with the shimmer, then it kind of stops and you just see the dark blue ink. We continue on with chapter 14 with the Rhodia paper. Then this last page is the Itoya Profolio paper, or Profolio Light paper. It came in a little booklet that had 60 pages, I think. And I just cut out one of the pages and stuck it in. Although I only used exactly one ink in here, and the last page is blank since there was no more of the chapter left. Now we move on to chapter 15, which I already showed you. Or did I? And then we get to chapter 16, which continues with the Shimmering Seas ink. And then that's the end of that chapter. I would give this a rating of 2 in that I like the ink enough. If I didn't have a similar ink, I would have bought it. The similar ink in question is the J. Herbin Blue Ocean. I think that ink is lighter than this, the Shimmering Seas inks, in terms of it's a lighter blue, but it still also has a gold shimmer, and I don't need 2 blue inks with gold shimmer like this. Moving on to chapter 17 and 18. This ink is the J. Herbin Poussière de Lune. Here we are. And this is my only one in the smaller bottle. I picked this pen to go with it. This is the Parker Vector XL pen with a medium nib. A lot of times I will forget that you can just pop off this cap like this. And then I would just start turning. And when I start turning, the bottom part of the pen comes out. But it's not to do with the pen, it's to do with me forgetting. The ink itself is a dark purple. It's almost grayish in tone. So it's a muted type purple. I don't have any ink like this, so I thought it was very nice. Here the ink did smear, but that was because I wrote damp hands. I had just washed my hands, and so that happened. Oh, and it looks like I got some smearing here as well. I did really like this ink. I would give it a rating of 1, and I might pick it up in the future. here we get to the last ink and the last pen. I was looking back at the inks I was using already, and I realized I used some shimmering inks and I used some shading inks, which I love, but I hadn't tried the sheening part of it. And I know that this paper works quite well with sheening inks. So I looked through my collection of ink samples, and I thought that the Colorverse Quasar would have some sheen to it. And this is like a bright, like ultramarine blue. I thought it would have some red sheen to it. The pen that I used was this Ferris wheel press brush fountain pen. It is very nice, but you can see, look, it rattles because when I turn to twist off the cap, it also turns this part where the section twists in, and that's pretty annoying. I think it has a medium nib. I like the details on the nib and on the grip, and I also like just the overall look of the pen. I'm bringing this as a close-up because I can't see any sheen whatsoever with this ink. It may be just maybe the wrong ink on this paper, or maybe it just only sheens when it's a lot of ink on the paper instead of this medium nib. So I don't know what happened there, but really it is a nice blue ink, and I love my blues. And then we get to the end. I felt that these two chapters were just way too short. I wanted to see more of the blue, although I think it is just a normal chapter size. I would give this ink a rating of 2. Just looking at this page, it reminds me of the Diamine Blue Velvet ink. That ink does have some sheening to it, which I can see, although I have not tried it on this paper yet. And now the next page is blank, and I continue on. I'm now reaching a dilemma where I'm running out of medium and bold nibs, which is why I'm thinking of putting in some stub nibs. I hope you enjoyed flipping through this notebook. I really like this project, and it's really not that hard to do one chapter a day. As you can see from my dates here, I actually did more than one chapter per day. And of course, that depends on the amount of time that I have. But I decided to make time to do it, and it was a lot of fun. So I'm going to be continuing on with that, and I'll show you the end result. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.